Hey, good morning, Dulce. Thanks for being my guest today. What is, in your opinion, what's the goal of therapy?
The goal of psychotherapy is the goal that the client brings with them. If they have something that they want to achieve, it's actually on my intake sheet.
Mm-hmm.
What's your therapeutic goal? Ultimately, though, the underlying common denominator is psychological health, which is another way of saying integration.
Like to become whole.
To become whole and to have the sense to be in touch with your authentic self. So you can listen to your intuition, you can stick up for yourself, you can stand in your truth, you can make healthy decisions and enjoy life.
Yeah. I like that definition of authenticity. It's like you know who you are well enough to stand your ground, to stick up for yourself, to make decisions, and to enjoy your life. It's like, some of us find silly humor funny, and not everybody finds that to be funny. And it's like, if it comes from a genuine place, people can tell when it's genuine versus contrived. So that's a great definition of a word that is like a fad word, like just be your authentic self.
Well, the authentic self, in my opinion, because I'm a transpersonal counselor, which means that the field of psychology that I've studied and I practice is the blend of the sort of the life story, birth to death, what happens in there, and includes one's spiritual nature. And we have this sort of crust around our bodies called the skin, and we have this crust around our authenticity called the personality, also ego structures. So in transpersonal counseling, they've got what is the spirit? What is the spirit saying? What are the what parts of you are connected to something much, much bigger than yourself?
Right.
What do those parts feel like? How can you utilize those?
That's a question I have on my intake form, and something interesting I found clinically is my patients that don't have and I would say it's a community, like to have something greater than yourself is to have some sort of community attachment. And when my patients say no, they don't have any deeper, bigger beliefs outside of themselves, they don't get better. Like they maybe come to see me once, maybe twice, and then kind of fall off. It's like we need something to support ourselves with. It's kind of interesting. Have you seen anything like that clinically as well?
That's a great observation. Yes, that's true. Nobody needs to believe in, Buddhism or Jesus or anything like that. But yes, there's this, our great curse, our great disease is our feeling of separateness. I'm alone. I'm not connected. So if we can connect, then we can have the support. And mostly what I work with is nature. Wilderness rites of passage, time spent in nature walks. Oftentimes, if I have a client who has no trust in the human race anymore, which happens, they can connect with a rock. They can connect with a tree, which sounds odd. But there are various eco-psychology practices that have been developed in the last, 20, 30 years, if not longer, to connect the individual psyche with nature.
Sure.
Like what's happening why are you looking at that tree? What does that tree show you about yourself? What do you see reflected in that tree? And then these practices, literal techniques, are incredibly empowering.
Yeah, I believe that. And humans, I generally think that we have an inherent goodness to us, but also hurt people, that cliche, right? And I get the whole, I'm done with the human race, everybody's kind of POS. And reconnecting themselves, which is to the greater themselves, capital themselves, by going out into nature, by sitting by a river, by sitting with a rock. There is some kind of energetic exchange. Do you find that to be the case?
Yes, that's a good energetic exchange. Absolutely. Everything here is there. And yeah, exactly.
I say microcosm, macrocosm. And I guess that's one of the benefits of the psychedelic like resurgence that's kind of happening right now is it's giving people that like deeper interconnectedness. That was my first experience on psychedelics, was like, whoa, the whole world is like super connected. And it's like, I feel this intense oneness the first time I used a psychedelic substance, which happened to be mushrooms. And I was totally blown away by that, because I was a little more in that group of like, I'm not really sure about humans anymore. You guys are we're all kind of yucky people. And I used to say that humans are cancer to the world. And I don't necessarily believe that anymore now. I think it's a little more of a nuanced conversation. What are your thoughts on the psychedelic resurgence?
I think for many people it's helpful. You know, one of the things that, because the crust of the personality and the rigidity of the thought system can prohibit a person from thinking outside their usual tendencies. So there's a lot of rigidity, there's a lot of blind spots, a lot of blinders. And so psychedelics can break that down. But so also, unfortunately, can trauma.
Totally.
You know, loss, crisis can really shatter a person and allow them to see things differently and recognize oneness.
Totally. That crust, I like that thought of like our crust of our skin, but the crust of our personality and our ego, kind of breaking it down. You know, there's a popular thought right now that you need to like do away with your ego. And I don't agree with that thought. What do you think about getting rid of your ego?
Well, the ego is very handy. It balances my checkbook. It keeps me scheduled. You know, am I on task?
Right.
It helps maintain, you know, you need a healthy functioning ego in the world. You really do. It's the dysfunctional ego. It's the shadow of the ego. It's the unconscious that causes the problems.
Yeah, I think of the ego as the piece that kind of keeps us safe. It's like, oh, do you really want to do that? Do you really want to go bungee jumping? Are you sure? And it's like, you know what? Actually, yes, I'm going to. The bungee jump is safe. I'm certain of that. But it does also have the like basic logical functions as well. One of the like dysfunctional ego pieces I think about is like, I kind of want a surgeon that's like super egotistical. They know exactly, like, oh yeah, I got that. I know exactly how to reconnect your veins. Like, don't worry about it.
Right. Sort of a healthy sense of narcissism. Sure, I'm the best.
I'm the best. Exactly.
And
I want
exactly
that with the surgeon.
What you want to hear.
Yes, for sure.
Right. It's discombobulating to lose the ego in the process of spiritual awakening, which is not uncommon for us. You know, we will go through periods of spiritual awakening, which when we can look at them through a psychological lens and marry them to the psychological lens, then we can feel as the ego is sort of trembling and quivering, oh golly, I'm going to lose my identity.
Right.
And we start to feel this all-encompassing knowing and these things that are in many ways inarticulate. It's difficult to say exactly what's happening. It's very threatening to the ego to go through something like that. Sure. And people, I've seen them in my practice, will go through a crisis.
Yeah, something life-changing. And that, you know, whether you have a profound experience on magic mushrooms or you have a profound loss or tragedy happen, that cracks our like spiritual self open if we allow it to, and not allow it to consume us and turn us into, you know, I like to say a pile over there in the corner.
Yeah.
It's like, if someone is dealing with that kind of like more significant piece, like they're over there and they've just been completely overwhelmed with whatever happened, what are some tools that you've seen be really valuable for people, or does it depend?
Well, we need time. Time is, and we trust psychic gestation, which is, you know, the psyche gestates and it knows. However, the person, and this is where the practitioner needs to be highly skillful, because you can't push that person. Person has to go in their own timing. So one of the steps is disidentification. You are not that, you know, that was part of you, perhaps a major part of you that was destroyed or hurt by this event. What are the other aspects of self? Then, of course, we're looking at archetypes. You know, what else is there? And it can be very difficult for a person to pull back from that, because there's so much emotional content there.
Sure.
And there's so many beliefs. It's almost like they're a butterfly pinned, and, this is what happened to me.
Right.
And so it's a slow, gentle, guided process of what else.
Yeah.
And it can mean unpacking the trauma, but only to the extent where you're not kind of digging that trauma in over and over.
On repeat.
You kind of want to pull out from it. And it's very effective to go slow and gentle and with the client's pacing.
Yeah, right. And that makes sense that, not to like re-traumatize them by like trying to make them come quicker, is like you've got to meet the patient, meet the client where they are. And some people, I'm going to guess, can probably go a little bit quicker, and some people it's really like gentle and gradual. I like that this term disidentification is when we were chatting prior to getting together for this. One of the things that really bothers me right now about the current like psychotherapy like model, or what's being talked about on social media, is these things happen to you and now you have anxiety and you have this and you have that, and like it becomes like a identity and like accepted way of functioning, because that's my diagnosis, and now I like own it, like I am anxious, I am depressed. I don't really like that.
Yeah, that's so well put. Carolyn Mace, you may have heard of her work. She's a medical intuitive. She used to be a reporter. She's written a lot of books. She wrote about the sacred contracts using Jung's archetypes and the astrology chart. Very fascinating, powerful theories, actually. She calls it woundology.
Ooh.
And that identification, as opposed to depression is passing through today.
Right. Or I feel sad, or I feel depressed, like that. Just 1 degree of separateness changes. And you're from Europe. And when I've talked to other friends of mine that are from Europe, they're like, yeah, you Americans are like really weird because you say I am something versus I feel something. And it's it's subtle, but it's different. Do you find that to be the case as well?
Well, I'm actually from Zimbabwe.
Oh, so sorry. Excuse me.
But I sound European.
Cool.
Yes, there's a different, America's a wonderful, wonderful place with an incredible sense of inner freedom, which hopefully we can retain. But yes, there are definite different thinking. But where I grew up and the time I spent in South Africa, there was a lot of repression due to apartheid.
Yeah.
So, But yes, there's a lot more. Europeans on the whole tend to be, they'll be more liberated.
Sure. Instead of owning things. Yeah. So, okay, sacred contracts, that's interesting. And when you say sacred contracts, that's the title of her book.
Yes.
And that's like what our soul is here in this lifetime to do or finish or wrap up. Is that kind of the thought there?
Yes. It's based on Roberta Assagioli and Carl Jung, who were somewhat in the same time period, that the notion of archetypes or subpersonalities. So, for example, mother, wife, healer, warrior, noticing how one appears, what roles one plays, and then are those parts congruent with one another? Have they agreed on something? Or is the teacher dominating the innocent child within?
I see.
So the innocent child wants to just go to the river and swim, but the teacher is like, no, we need to do research and we can't leave the computer. And
right.
So we look for, the sacred contract model looks for congruency and connection between the archetypes.
This is like finding balance. And when you say archetypes, this is like the archetype of mother versus like your mom, or, it's the collective mother, the collective warrior. And I think about those things in like the greater goodness again, and like everything has a shadow, which is what I do appreciate about Jung's work, is like for each good aspect, there is a, quote unquote negative aspect. I don't necessarily find it to be like, it's pros and cons. Like there's some benefit to picking up your sword, and there's some benefit to keeping your sword put away and being mindful of your actions.
So true. The archetype itself is neutral.
Right.
You're quite right. That's exactly right.
And so then it's the path that we choose to take. So archetypes, I don't know all the dirty details of all the types. The little bit of time I spent studying with a Jungian psychotherapist, we talked about 4 main archetypes, and that was the king, queen, magician, warrior, and lover. And I find that, clinically, it's not the most useful to like start with a patient right there, but sometimes it's like, the person comes into the office and they're really upset by maybe such and such behavior. And I'm like, yeah, well, your constitution, your archetype, like, can you be okay with this is maybe how you present yourself to the world, and like find a way to like massage it that feels congruent with how you want to live your life.
Yeah, I like that. Yes, definitely. And I your approach to the sort of gentleness with, this is how you may be coming across. Yeah. And I think that probably you and I see a lot of the victim archetype.
Definitely.
And this was one of the 4 primary ones that Carolyn Mace talks about. The victim, the prostitute, the saboteur, and the child. Those are the 4 primary. And the victim has an important role. That's the one that says, I'm wounded. Something happened. Excuse me. I need to heal. And so the victim carries the story. In the Navajo tradition, you tell the story 3 times, and then they turn their backs on you.
Yeah.
So that's why in the therapeutic context, the story, how much emphasis is put on the story
versus the experience.
Yes. And sometimes we need to spin out, and this comes from the work of Colin Tipping and radical forgiveness. We need to spin out the facts from the beliefs.
Right. The emotional piece versus like what actually, like facts, boots on the ground, what happened. And that's tricky for even the most skilled person to do, in my experience. It's like when something really hard happened, and I'm thinking of one particular, actually I've had a number of these, like they're like between 50 and 70, and they've got like stories that happened to them decades prior, and they just like own it so much. And it's tough to like, okay, what are the facts here, and what is your emotional experience of this situation? And what does one have more importance than the other?
In terms of the facts or the, I wouldn't put it in terms of importance.
Okay.
I would look at it as what is the underlying premise?
Ooh.
What's the underlying premise here? There are many secondary gains or negative gains for holding on to a wounded sense of self.
You get attention. I know that's a big one.
You get to
want to be heard and
nap
seen
all day or whatever it is. Take pills.
Sure.
They're really not functioning things. That's why they're called secondary gains,
right?
Because they're negative.
Right.
So the underlying premise is, did the patient give up somewhere? Did they lose hope? Did they forget what else? Sometimes it goes to, well, I see the wounded part of you. Thank you for sharing that. But there's a part of you that brought you here today who wants to heal.
Yeah.
What's that part have to say about your healing journey? And then immediately start empowering the client. Because as you and I have talked before, you can take the horse to water.
Yeah.
And
you can't, and I have a terrible joke that I like to share. It's like, we can take the horse to water and we can't force it to drink unless you're the CIA, and then waterboarding is legal. And I don't work for the CIA. It's a terrible joke, but it gets the point across. It's like,
awful.
It's hard when you see someone struggling and you're just like, come on, like you're so close to the figuring it out, but they have to figure it out. It's their journey, their story. You said something that reminded me of a patient I had when I was a student, and maybe this doesn't surprise you, but I really struggle with like people that, are like, I feel so depressed. I have depression severely. Because to me, that's not something I've personally dealt with to that degree where like, whoa. And I spent a lot of time in my counseling shift with this one gal, and we did just that. I was like, well, what kind of brought you here that like made you want something different? And then she starts going into like all this, like the art and the literature that she's interested in. I'm like, oh my God, I had no idea about this part of yourself, because we've been so focused on like the feeling of depression and what that's like and why your job and why your husband and blah, blah, blah. And like, there was this brightness that then happened with her. And we got it cracked open, and like we were able to I helped her help herself. And that was really profound to like, wow, there's like, we're multifaceted. We're not just one thing, which is why I think it's really valuable to kind of divorce ourselves from, those deep diagnoses. And depression is a diagnosis, people. You can be sad, you can be in grief, you can be in loss, but to say I'm depressed, depression is a diagnosis. It's not a feeling, unless you have a diagnosis, I guess.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's great success with that person. Depression is awful.
It is.
I mean, it's paralyzing. Pain is paralyzing. You lose yourself, your joy. But underneath depression, there is something underneath. I mean, depression is, think of that word.
Depression.
Yes, it's pushed down. And so you and I are working with people. You as a physician, a naturopathic doctor, and I as a therapist, psychotherapist. By the time a person has an embodied disorder, that whatever issue they've been depressing, repressing, projecting, denying, has metabolized. It's become real. It's become flesh. So oftentimes in my work, there's a somatic quality to it. Like where in the body is this depression lurking? Been working with a lady who severely depressed, mostly due to very difficult childhood trauma, and then a marriage that seems to be mirroring what happened in childhood. And for her, it's all right here, at the thymus. So it's tight. She's uncomfortable. Then it goes up into her neck. And so part of her daily practice is what the Greeks used to do. Activate that thymus.
Interesting.
Get it going. So the physical component is what's happening, and then the time to be with that part of your body. My gut hurts. You're lying down, being in your chair, feeling your stomach, sending love to your stomach. Precious little tummy, how much you've done for me, how much I love you, and listening to what that organ wants to say. So you're marrying up, you're connecting, you're nourishing, you're listening to those parts of yourself.
You're encouraging people to develop a sense of intuition that maybe, and I don't know other cultures, but I know that like Western culture, we've been so disconnected from our intuition. And some of us even say, only certain people get to have that. It's like, I actually think everyone has a sense of intuition. It's just, we're not keen on listening. And when we take the time to sit and like, where do you feel the anxiousness? Where do you feel the depression? And you start to like tune into your body and unwind, unfurl. And then maybe it's like, wow, like I really don't like my boss. Maybe I need to leave my job. And maybe that's part of that feeling and that sensation that gal is experiencing, for example. That's interesting.
I like that word, unfurling. I think that's very true. Sometimes we don't allow ourselves to see the truth of something. It's too threatening.
Yeah. And I know you're familiar with Gabor Mate's work.
Yes.
I really love his work. I haven't read his newest book, but I've read When the Body Says No. And in that book, there's a story of a gal, and I know I've said this before, but it just stuck with my mind so much. She worked for the Canadian version of the IRS, and she got significant cancer diagnosis after working there for 30 years. She hated her job. I mean, I wouldn't want to work for the IRS. I could just imagine. You get calls from people that are grumpy and upset. They owe the government blah, blah, blah money. And you're going to get your ear chewed off. And you're just doing your job.
30 years.
30 years. And then she was like, oh, I got a cancer diagnosis. I guess I can leave. And so Dr. Monte's just like, oh, wait a minute here. You know, why didn't you leave 20 years ago? Well, you know, it was good money. It was easy to stay. It wasn't too bad. But it really was that bad. And like her body literally was like, we're done here. You need to make a change yesterday. And so now she finally was able to make that change.
Absolutely. Golden handcuffs.
Yep. It's real. So embodied disorder, that's a really curious, and that's kind of like this like victimology, the woundology, like this owning of whatever happened to us. Do you find that there's some like core wounds that your clientele tends to have?
Well, first of all, there are genuine things that happen where we break.
Totally.
You know, it's not our fault.
No.
You know, shit happens.
Shit does happen. Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Oh, you said the word. Okay.
Yes.
Shit happens, and we're fragile. We're humans. This is a hard place sometimes. Earth is very beautiful.
It is.
But it can be very hard. And so sometimes we break.
Yeah.
And sometimes we cannot be put back the way we were.
No. For better or worse.
Yeah. Yeah. And so that's very, very painful. There's a lot of acceptance that comes with that. I'm not who I used to be. And as Thich Nhat Hanh would say, you know, the great Buddhist monk, the Vietnamese monk, who am I now?
Yeah.
Who am I now?
What a beautiful discovery if we allow ourselves that, to explore what happens next. It reminds me of that, when I did theater when I was in high school, and it was yes and. Yes and. What's next?
Right.
And I think about that often. You know, like anyone else, I've had my fair share of like BS things that I've had to sit through and that feel never ending and difficult and just like, oh, I'm going to die. But those are seasons of life typically, you know, and we're not in this moment victim blaming or shaming or blaming, you know, none of that. We are having a real conversation though, that like when we see people that are dealing with things sometimes decades later, it's like, okay, what I like that the Dine way of like, you have 3 times. And then after that, like, come on, man, like, can you dust yourself off a little bit? I'm not saying you need to be 100% better tomorrow, but can you just knock one piece of dust off and like move your big toe a little bit further, you know?
Or maybe if that's not possible, maybe there's an acceptance for what is. An acceptance for what is.
Yeah, and that's a mindfulness practice.
Yeah, I'm well and truly broken. My legs will never work again. You know, I cannot walk. I mean, I can walk, but
metaphorically,
you know,
yes.
Right. So maybe there's, rather than the rage and anger over that, and that rage and anger can be very useful.
It
actually,
sure can be.
You can use it in other places in different ways. But there can be an acceptance, and there can be a lot of grief over what used to be that is no longer. And so therefore there's a lot of support for the client in that grief journey. I'm no longer who I used to be. Yeah. And this is why actually those nature-based practices are very useful. I do a method I won't say developed by the Lakota Sioux. The Lakota Sioux, it's their rite of passage formula. And it's basically an opportunity to be in wilderness for about 5 days, the middle 3 of which are fasting and alone, to acknowledge the transition point that you're at. You know, to really face who you are no longer, and let that go, and then to sort of sit in an empty space. We could call that a liminal space, and then to enter into a consciously created purpose circle. These are the things. This is what I want to be. Now, of course, not everybody can do that. There are handicapped people who can't do that, but we have ways to create a ritual or an acknowledgement to stop in our life right now. Stop. Where am I now? Is this going the right way? Yeah. You know, what am I want to tell myself? What do I want to let go of? What do I want to hold sacred? What do I want to build?
It's kind of like what's serving me. Or it's just reminiscent to when I had Aaron Easton on the podcast. We were talking about mindfulness. And it's like, what is serving me now versus what am I holding on to that I need to accept is no longer. And those are tricky things. Like to be, going from, a maiden and now having a child, I have to let go of some of the things that I once thought were important to me. I actually had a really interesting, when my son was in the hospital, I went to a yoga class, and the place that used to bring me, she was like, okay, go to your place that brings you peace. And that place wasn't the place anymore. And like, oh my God, that just like hit me so hard. I was like, that was always the place I went to, as a spot in New Zealand when I was traveling. And now it was my son's face. And I was like, whoa, like how quickly that happened. And I didn't even know. But that moment was pretty profound. You can tell I'm getting a little teary-eyed thinking about it, because
very emotional
it was unexpected. And can we be okay with things when they're unexpected? That's tricky. Mm-hmm. But in that moment, I was just like, wow, how beautiful it is to acknowledge the transition that has just happened. And that's what you're speaking to, giving ourselves that space, the liminal space, the space in between, to transition and allow what was to become what's now.
Right.
And I know we're speaking like blah, 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 but...
No, that's very true. Mm-hmm. It's happening in our country.
Yep.
It's happening with our weather patterns.
Mm-hmm.
We're in a very large state of transition.
Yeah.
But you're absolutely right to sort of honor that space.
Mm-hmm.
So important. And we move at such a fast pace.
Oh my God.
It's difficult for people to,
You probably see this gentleman walking. I see him walking all the time. About the time I'm driving to work, I see him walking. I assume to work. And
does he wear the Carhartt jacket?
Oh no, I've seen him too though. There's a few walkers into town. But when I walk or when I bike to and from work, I feel like my pace that I am at, rather than feeling rushed, I feel like I've arrived, because biking and walking are more human pace rather than driving 30 miles or flying 500 miles an hour. Those are not really paces that the human body is like made for. You know what I'm saying? It's like, yes, we can do those things, but like, are they the best for our health long term?
Absolutely. I love to walk to work. I love to walk downtown. Absolutely. It's important. You're quite right.
Yeah.
That's such a good observation that we fly here and there, dry at top speeds.
Fast.
Yeah.
Go.
Mm-hmm.
Can we do more things in our short period of time? Mm-hmm. And time has become so like important to me. It's like, okay, it's really difficult to do some things with one hand while I'm holding my son or whatever. But I've found, there's a lot more that I can do. But also it's really difficult to like chop vegetables while I'm holding him. So it's like my time has become so much more important to me. But also not rushing, because I don't want to rush through his smallness phase. But I also have things to do, right? So like it's this interesting, like I'm being aware of this challenge that is. Mm-hmm. But that doesn't make it less challenging.
Well, you're a young mother, and I'm in awe. I have 3 heroes, parents, organic farmers, and teachers.
Organic farmers.
Oh yes,
sure.
and 4 of them, and healers. Mm-hmm. Those are my 4 heroes.
Mm-hmm.
And I just don't know how young mothers and fathers, they've got to be at work at 8, if not before. Mm-hmm. They've got little children.
Yeah.
Money doesn't go as far. I just take my hat off to them. It's amazing, and they're raising wonderful children.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
In an ideal world, yes, that's the case.
If they have the time, to do that.
Right. And again, like that, the society, we could talk about that for a while. I kind of want to like backtrack a little bit, because something when we were chatting that I thought was really valuable was like recognizing that we all have our form of a core wound. And I feel like, again, this is like, we feel so alone in our way of being. Mm-hmm. And maybe it's our society, but also I think it's like the greater, like we've been disconnected from something greater than ourselves. And, I shared that my core wound, whenever I feel like I've done something wrong, is like, oh man, I am not enough. And that is, I'm not the only one. Like that's actually one of the most common core wounds that we as humans have and experience. What are some other core wounds that you've seen in your work?
Well, definitely I'm not enough. Mm-hmm. I'm unlovable. I'm unlovable. And there's something wrong with me.
Oh.
There's something wrong with me.
I need to be fixed. Yeah.
Well, and there's actually a genuine, and that's accompanied by deep shame. And according to the scale of vibration, David Hawkins, MD, Power versus Force, the lowest vibration is shame.
Mm-hmm.
So if you have that, there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
There's a very low shame vibration. There's a fantastic story that Pema Chodron told. You know Pema Chodron, of course, the Buddhist teacher. She was at this retreat with some women, and her friend all of a sudden didn't like her. There was some animosity between them.
Yeah.
And Pema was, oh my gosh, what's going on? She doesn't like me. She doesn't like me. So she went into the meditation room, and all night she sat up, wrestling with this. What had she done? And it came to her that her entire personality construct, the way she'd become herself, was to avoid the feeling she was feeling in that moment, which was that she was unlovable. So at some point, if we have courage and opportunity, we can face that. And that's where our tenderness, that's where we take that little unlovable part of ourselves. You know, that warty little horrible looking thing with spiky hair, you little monster, you know. And that's where we have that love and tenderness for that part of ourselves. Because on a psychological level, it exists.
It does.
Because it's actually running the show unconsciously.
Yeah.
So that's where the love comes.
In my experience, like that, you're like talking about integrating like our shadow self, our like the part of ourselves we don't like. I mean, there's parts of myself I don't like either, but like I recognize that they have served a purpose or are valuable at some point. Like sometimes I need to be a bitch in order to get the point across. And then it's like, okay, do I need to do that all the time? No. But there's a time and a place for that part of like, for me to come out and deal with my stuff. And, you know, I've talked with a good friend of mine about this, and it's like when we can imagine like the most ridiculous things. I have a great imagination. I don't watch scary movies. I generally discourage people from doing so. You don't need to watch true crime before you go to bed, people. Come on. Our imaginations are very profound, and maybe it's just mine, but I'm pretty sure we as humans have this capacity. Just look at the authors. Anyway, when we can let our mind wander to those dark crevices, the monster pokey hair, the warty, the yucky things, and like, wow, that is a messed up thought that I'm having. Whoa. And recognize that, but not be scared of it. That's the thing, and being like, wow, like, that's interesting. I never thought that my brain could go to that point.
Right. Yeah. And is there an emotional content attached to that?
Yeah.
It's not just the thought.
Sure.
It's the emotions that are attached to it. It's the cascade of emotions that occur. You know, maybe you're having a cortisol rush or something at that time. You know, maybe something is happening, anxiety's coursing through you. So that thought can, you know, trigger a lot of things.
Sure. Like the worriers, I think about like, oh, you know, what happens if my kid crosses the street and X, Y, and Z happens because there's not a crosswalk guard, or whatever the case might be. And there's a place actually for people to be a little more like having those anxious tendencies. And there's value there. I guess it's like, I don't really feel like an emotion. I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. But I wonder if over the years, like I've become more like observant, and I think practicing yoga has given me this skill of like, can I separate myself and like the facts versus emotion and be like, oh wow, Shayna, that is messed up train of thought. I don't really think about is there value there anymore, but I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. Like,
right.
Maybe I could be
where my mind went.
Right, exactly. Where my mind went. I tend, you know, if I have a tendency, it's like I tend towards anxiousness, tend towards worry. So that's my imagination of like, wow, I just imagined 10 scenarios in like 30 seconds of like the worst cases that could happen. It's like, can I reel back? And so maybe the feeling there is actually as I'm an external processor of being like more on the anxious side of things, right?
And then if you were to look at that sort of therapeutically, psychotherapeutically, you might sort of trace that back. Like when these anxious thoughts are coming up, what what triggered them, what was the external cue, and it's usually fear, particularly for somebody you love. And then that's very natural. So a sense of, wow, that's natural. That, for example, I was worried about my little boy or, worried about my husband or whatever it might be. So there's a sense of, and then looking beneath that, okay, I've got some tendencies here. What was my programming?
Sure.
Was I raised in a situation where crisis happened quite frequently and I didn't get picked up from school?
Oof.
Yeah. And so therefore I learned not to depend on anybody. And so when I go into this state of anxiety, it's probably for very good reason. And I'm going to have to come up with some inner resources.
Yeah. Ooh, inner resources. I like that. But you like that coming back to being like, that's okay. That's that tenderness. That's that compassion you're talking about. And so often I see, at least with, those few, decades long patients of mine, like they have a hard time like giving themselves that self-love. And that's interesting. Where would the conditioning, love is not safe, love is conditional, maybe. And there's some, if there's something wrong with me, I am then unlovable.
And I deserve this illness. I deserve this. Ooh. I'm going to suffer because I deserve it.
Yeah. It makes me feel sad.
Yeah, there's a lot of heavy sadness.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's not the end of the story. I mean, they're coming to you, they're coming to me, they're coming to other practitioners because there are other parts of them that know that things can change.
Yeah, another aspect that says there's got to be something else.
Well, that's where inner resources are so important. Working with the unconscious is pretty juicy. It's a juicy, juicy place to work. The unconscious is like a deep ocean. You can't really see down in it. It's deep. Is that a shark down there? What's going on down there? And so hypnosis is a very powerful tool because you can go into the unconscious and find these things and change them. And gain an inner resource. For example, let's say your mother wasn't the most nurturing.
Sure.
In a hypnotic journey, you can find your inner mother. So my inner mother is actually she's called Nanny Mommy. She's a sort of a Polynesian lady with long sort of gray black hair and giant boobs. And she my little self when I was in Africa, that's when a lot of things happen. And so when I feel that part of myself fear, I just feel my inner Nanny Mommy. And she picks me up and I just, nestle in those, I'm like cuddled.
Safe,
I'm safe in these big pillows and her arms, and I'm safe. So I can experience a feeling of safety in what would otherwise I'd be panicked.
Right.
So you can have an inner warrior, inner mate, higher self. It's a very rich and juicy inner healer.
That's you tapping into the collective consciousness of what a mother is, of what a healer is, of what a warrior is, like the capital mother, right? And what I so appreciate about that is like it takes away from like my mom or my dad or my teacher or my healer, like these things were not maybe ideal or there was some injustice or some wrongdoing, and but we have to give ourselves that space to create or to tune in. So again, we're coming back to like our own intuition, and can we give ourselves those moments to find that capital mother archetypal energy that we can then self-soothe with.
And it is capital mother with an M. It is universal. It is generalized. However, there's also our own nurturing capacity.
Yeah.
So much of how we live is contracted. Our muscles are tight, our thoughts are tight,
that rigidity.
Right, and the only way we can sort of relax is, have a drink or smoke something or eat something,
sure.
or, sex or shopping or whatever, and then that's very temporary. So this idea of being able to relax and expand. We've got infinite capacity. So when we make the journey into the inner self, the unconscious self, we can discover those hidden rooms, those aspects of self that are so much broader than we imagined. And then we can feel our capacity for love and our capacity for peace. And then we're in touch with the beautiful people on our planet Earth who have shown us that, you know?
Yeah. And I don't know if you can feel that, but like the difference in talking about like shame or depression or anxiety, like it has like a contractility to it versus talking about love and like compassion. Like there feels like there's an expansiveness in the room when we're talking about that. Like I feel that. That's so interesting to like recognize. I'm curious with that last thought you said, Dulce, it brought something to my thought of when we experience something like, okay, separate from trauma, like I understand that, but like when we experience something and we own the label, perhaps it's because, or an aspect because we are too scared to tap into our own intuition for what might be there. Is that something you've seen?
Yeah, that's very true. There's the thing, oh my goodness, maybe someone did sexually abuse me. Maybe it was,
right.
Somebody, and we just, we can't. So there's something like that. It could also be that we have an aspect of self that is very, very, very protective.
Yeah.
And very rigid and came into being very early, especially if there's been some disassociation and some splintering.
Yeah.
Then we can have, we can literally be walled off from certain things for different reasons. But sometimes there's an inner skeptic. It's not going to work. I'm not going to get well.
Yeah.
I'm just not. Yep. And then that's the one we need to bring on board. Give that inner skeptic a job to do. I'm going to have you take this, I'm just throwing this out, 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C, and I want the inner skeptic to note what happens.
Yeah, exactly. Just like, are there any subtle changes?
Right.
Yeah. Giving that part of ourselves something to do. I appreciate that. Then it kind of, okay, so I'm like trying to remember the terminology with Jungian psychology. When there's a part of ourself, okay, are you familiar with like the book series, The Magicians?
No.
It was made into a sci-fi TV series.
I've got to get it.
It's actually quite good if you can get away from like the modernization of it. It's a little bit ridiculous, but actually there's some pretty profound Jungian concepts in there. And in the last, sorry, spoiler alert. In the last season, one of the main characters, his name is Elliot, and he becomes a lush. Like he is using substances to deal with all the crap that's happened to him thus far in the series. And there's this thing inside of him that he's like worried that it's like this terrible, terrible, awful thing. It's knocking at the door, knocking at the door, knocking at the door. And finally he gets to a point where he's just like, I'm just going to open the door. And he's been avoiding it for like almost 2 seasons at this point. Guess what? It's not a monster. And this whole time he thought it was a monster, and I have to just keep it behind the door because I'm fearful of what might be behind there. And I feel like there's some Jungian concept that's that way. And when we avoid, and then we're finally just like, we give up. But it's actually not really giving up. It's allowing and it's accepting. It's like, oh, wow, that was actually a really useful part of myself that I was denying.
And a lot of energy was going into the repression. Gosh, I could have been doing this or that.
Right.
Instead, all this energy was going there. It's like that dream that Jung had. In this dream that he had, he was rushing through a cold and windy, wet night, and he was being chased by this monster. And he was terrified. He was running and running. Oh, this thing was coming at him. And then suddenly he stopped, and he looked in his hands, and there was a light. And that's where his focus was. So that story of Elliot, and the story that Jung's dream, if we can, sometimes that shift of perception really does the trick.
Right. Right, exactly. And shifting perception is not always the easiest thing, but there's so much value in it. And it's like we all have a lens in which we look through the world. And, you know, I'm not saying we need to all put our rose tinted glasses on and pretend like everything's peachy keen and hunky dory, but can we pivot and, like, you know, take someone else's perception and see, oh, what if I just answer the door instead of I'm scared to answer the door?
Right.
If I just answer the
we
door?
may need some inner resources for that. We may need an inner warrior. We may need a couple of cops, you know, on the inside. You know, we may need to open the door with a big secure plexiglass in front of us.
Sure.
Yes. Yeah.
It's something to change. It's like, obviously what he was doing wasn't working. And so he had to make a change in order to, and I don't think after that he continued to, like, overindulge in substances because he was no longer trying to keep a part of himself down, right?
That is such a true statement. Addictions of all forms are associated with some sort of inner terror or pain or something.
It is truly a coping strategy. And, like, before we just started, I wanted to not say, like, psychotherapy is like a way to cope with life. No, it's tools to help you deal with life, because life doesn't typically get easier. It gets a little more responsible, it gets more interesting, and, you know, people die, you lose your job, people get sick. Like, these things happen, and they're not within our control entirely. I will say, like, you know, obviously prioritizing sleep and eating well and but sometimes you lose your job and that was out of your control, right? And you know, can we manage? I'm trying to, like, be mindful of my words here. Can we use the things we've learned in psychotherapy, graduating psychotherapy and not needing to be in therapy for the rest of our lives for all eternity, then move forward through the challenges that life presents us with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Once we've looked at, you know, what was hurting, come to some sort of inner agreement, integration, got some tools and some resources. Absolutely. You know, my idea for therapy is 3 to 6 sessions.
I like that.
I've had clients who've wanted to come week after week after week for month after month, and I can't do that. It's not. Let's get the show on the road.
That's interesting, because you could say, okay, yeah, you know, I can just pretty much, you know, take like 3 notes and get paid and not have to do much
maybe
effort.
I'll be able to go to Hawaii.
Ooh,
yeah, but no, that's not how I roll.
It doesn't feel ethical, though. I'm that way
isn't.
too. Like, if there becomes a point with a patient, it's like, I don't know that I'm the best fit for you. Perhaps another person would be better suited, or, you know, you keep coming to me and you're saying that you're inconsistent. Like, I don't want to spin my wheels or waste your time, waste my time. Like, there's someplace else that's better suited for you.
Well, that's so. Whether it's effective or not, they can find out in that experience. I think what I've noticed is that those folks who do come, they are ready to do it. And if they find that inner block where they just cannot or don't want to go forward, then we trust it. We trust the psychic gestation. I might see them 6 months later, a year later. So I'll have clients that I'll see, you know, for that 3 to 6 month visit, and then I won't see them for a while, and then they'll have a life event.
Sure.
And they'll come back and they'll share what's going on, and they're using their tools and they're using their resources, but they've come to an edge, a psychological edge. There's a sort of a black void beyond that's frightening. How do they go into that? How do they go into the care for their aging parent, and their own deep resentment, you know, that the parent didn't care for them?
Right.
So we will come to another psychological edge.
I like that. And then, to use your terms, like, you're helping them develop resources so that they can and are capable of moving forward, dealing with their resentment. And also, like, that speaks to something too, in that you can't get back what you don't feel like you didn't get. Sorry, there's a lot of double negatives in there. You can't get back what you missed. You can only move forward and accept that maybe your parent wasn't the best parent, but they were the best parent that they could be given the resources they had also. That was something that was very helpful for me personally, of, like, being compassionate for my own parents. Like, they're humans too at the end of the day. And no one's perfect. And that's where tapping into those archetypes and having our own inner resources can be really valuable, because we ultimately become our own people. I really love the Kahlil Gibran set of poems. The prophet, yeah. And the one on children is like, I don't own my children. I don't, like, that is something that comes through me, and I get to tend, but Richard Ethan's his own person. And that to me gives me that like separation. Yes, I'm his mom, and yes, I get to parent him and care for him, but I don't get to like rigidly tell him how he needs to be. He gets to show me, and maybe it's like, maybe we don't throw rocks at Johnny. Maybe, you know, we choose a different way to like conflict solve, right? And like I help him develop a better skill pattern, but you know, it's ultimately his journey, and I just get to help shape that, right? And that again is that standing back and being in that place of everybody has their own way of being, and can we accept them for who they are rather than try to make that person be how I want them to be.
A sort of a firm gentleness, you know, the awareness of that. Yes. You know, you said something that was really good there. I was trying to, it'll come back to me, I'm sure. Yeah.
Poetry, I feel like, and you know, we share this in common. We both really love the poet Rumi. His work was written in the 1300s and feels like it was written yesterday for today, which I love, love, love. You obviously know Coleman Banks.
Yes. Yeah, he transcribed him.
Exactly, the transcription. And I feel like that's got to be really challenging to go from Arabic, which is a really rich and beautiful language, to come to English, which has its own sense of richness, but not the way that other languages like Arabic and Sanskrit have. Their languages, I won't even pretend like I understand because I don't speak either, but there's a lot more nuance in it than there is in English. And words have multiple meanings in English that they, you know, there's different ways of speaking to them.
Yes, language is so key. And it came to me now, forgiveness is a huge factor, at least in my work and the people who come to see me. As you were saying about your parents, you know, forgiveness is enormous, because, you know, terrible things happen, bad things happen, and we can be trapped in time with that events, plural. We can be trapped emotionally by the negativity around those events, resentment, blame, anger, sadness. So it's really, if we look at sort of our lives as a kind of a movement, we can become locked down in a certain point in life. And that's where we bring the lens of, you know, what is the belief here? You know, the belief I'm unlovable. If the belief that I'm unlovable is running the show, I need to look at that closely. And then, were there factors? Were there people who told me I was unlovable? Were there events and behaviors that showed I was unlovable?
Proving that I know that that's the case then.
So that's where a lot of forgiveness. And so, you know, that forgiving the parents or whoever in a way that it's not that sort of traditional forgiveness. It's a forgiveness where that event, that behavior occurred to show me a part of myself that I've disowned. That little part, you know,
reflection.
Yes, it's happened to show me that part of myself, so that I can claim that part of myself, so somebody else doesn't have to show it to me.
And that's that spiral. You know, he's like, some people need to learn that same lesson, and this is where we go back to our core wounds. I am unlovable, or I'm not enough, or something's wrong with me. Like, how many times do we need to be reflected that is the case? And then in every moment that we get that sensation back, oh, see, proof that I'm not enough. It's like, wait a minute. This is just showing I have one more little sliver. Like,
what if you
put
take
this
that
back?
Yeah, what if you found that little part of yourself who's not enough? That's right.
And stitch it back
in. And brought her in and said, hey, it's okay, you are enough. Look at you.
It's another opportunity to it's forgiving others, but it's forgiving ourselves for disowning. And it's like, I'm being more like, can we pull ourselves back, bird's eye view, rather than like saying when you were 5 and X, Y, and Z happened, it's your fault. No, it's a little more like, to move forward, can we say, oh, I'm so sorry. I like didn't know that I was missing that part of myself. Thank you for showing me, and I'm going to put it right back here. Right? And like love on that spot.
And actually, that's a great anchor in hypnotherapy. You call that a physical anchor. So when that comes up, I'm going to touch this part, and then I remember. So it's an anchor.
Interesting.
They call it an anchor.
Right, that makes sense. And I've used in other techniques, EMDR is something I've done quite a bit of. Actually, I think only 6, maybe 7 sessions. You don't really need a lot, in my experience, with a good practitioner, unless they're being, unethical and just trying to whatever. But I would use, I wore a different ring, and I would use a ring because I'm a fiddler. So then I would have like my ring that I would wear, and that would help bring me back and like, in the moment.
Right, you had that anchor. There's another factor that comes up that I've noticed, is what's called moral injury.
Ooh.
So oftentimes we see ourselves as being victimized by others or events, but sometimes we are the perpetrator.
Ooh.
We, beat up on our brother, or, stole from someone or something. And that's a terrible weight to bear.
Yeah.
And again, that's something in which we're frozen in time and space and can have physiological consequences.
What did you call that?
Moral injury.
Moral injury. Right. And so again, that brings us back to like, can you have the self-compassion to say, you know what? That wasn't the nicest thing I did. And self-forgiveness. It's like, again, those are the shadow parts of ourselves. It's like we all have the capacity to... did you ever read the book Lord of the Flies?
Yes, so William Golding.
That book, I read that in like middle school or something like that.
Absolute classic.
And we all have the ability within ourselves, if it comes down to survival, I believe we all can kill. And people that say they can't, they haven't explored themselves, in my judgmental opinion. Because we all have that capacity. And if we come down to nitty gritty and it's you versus me, and, did you ever see City Slickers? With Billy Crystal.
Yes.
Please pass the fill.
On the ranch.
Yeah, exactly. Please pass the fill. When he's like, yeah, if we all die out here and I start to die first, you guys can kill me off. It's like, please pass the fill. And it's like, I like to bring humor into things, but the reality is like, if someone is dying and it's between eating my friend and me surviving, like, we're going to do the thing that's going to keep us alive in that desperate moment. And there's been case after case after case in real life, not just Lord of the Flies, but many of us have read that book. And, we need... I really will emphasize, I believe truly that the majority of us need the ability to sit down and explore the depths of ourselves, to see the crevices, to see that we are capable of, and that we get to choose not to. Like, to me, that's the profoundness of like, we can be terrible, but we also get to not be, and get to like buffer our edges, and like, wow, what an opportunity is to like meet other people that have a differing perspective than myself. And that's the spice of life, the richness. I'm a big fan of having people from all different walks. And yeah, I live in Montrose, which is pretty homogenized, but I've had a lot of really interesting conversations with people that look just like and sound just like me, but they have a very different perspective on life. And I find those to be such rich conversations to have. And can we bring each other back together again, despite our seeming differences? And like, especially in the world we live in right now, we need to remember that we are 99.99% the same genetically, regardless of our physical differences, our lived experiences that may be different. We are so much the same.
Yeah.
We have these 3 main core wounds. I guarantee you, every person we talk to, hey, instead of say, how's the weather? Hey, what's your core wound? I know most people are not going to be privy to that.
Some people don't know.
Sure.
It takes a long time. It was only in the last couple of years that I discovered a couple of my own.
Sure.
And sometimes the most difficult people who come into our lives and cause upset are very, very helpful, because they help point to the place where we disassociated, where there was a misunderstanding. Yeah. And the idea is, as we come to those edges, we increase our capacity. And what you said about someone who like in the Lord of the Flies, who hurt someone, we all have the capacity for that. When we come to that place where we went beyond what we thought we could do, beyond our own value, we learned something very valuable. This is my value.
Yeah.
I went beyond it, and by going beyond it, I learned where it was.
Right. And that things aren't always so rigid.
Right.
Like I try to be mindful of the never and always. When I say never, guess what? I usually have an experience that says, aha, we have to modulate, and there's a time and a place for everything. That's like one of the things I tell my patients a lot. Like, oh, you're anti-medication. No. Look at the therapeutic order. The therapeutic order is our guiding like stone for naturopathic medicine. And there is everything on there, including surgery. You know, I don't see patients with cancer, but, you know, it is written into my scope of practice that if I were to see someone that has a cancer diagnosis, they have to have an oncologist. Like, there is a time and a place for all forms of medicine, whether you like it or not. It's like, I hope I don't have to have that experience, but my son was saved by modern medicine, and had he been born prior to the advent of a continuous EEG, he might not have made it, right? And so, like, I am so grateful for modern medicine, and I knew, but to have that, like, to have that be such a fresh, like, see, there is a time and a place, and it's like, we're not anti, we're not against, we have to work together to increase our capacity. We are all on the same healthcare team, whether we're a psychotherapist or an naturopathic doctor,
absolutely,
an MD,
PT, exactly.
PT, speech therapist,
yoga teacher,
medical intuitive, nutritionist,
exactly.
right? We all have our own place, and like, not everybody needs a psychotherapist, just like not everybody needs a naturopathic doctor. Maybe because we're not ready, maybe because we just don't need it. And like, I had a colleague of mine say it's a privilege to not need someone like myself. And I agree with that, because if I didn't find a naturopathic doctor, I probably would be dead. But also the privilege I have then of sitting with people that are like doing a little bit of deeper work, doing a little bit of deeper work with yourself as well. Like, it's quite the privilege and an honor, and I appreciate it.
Oh, that's fabulous. Yeah. The sense that we are bigger, more expanded and more connected is such a beautiful concept, and it's true. And so many of us live in fear and contraction.
Yeah.
So
any final thoughts, Dulce?
Wow, what an open-ended question. On psychotherapy itself, on life, you know, I do believe that our two greatest gifts that we have are love and forgiveness. To me, those are remarkable. And the other final piece is to let give time.
Yeah.
You know, just give time.
Yeah.
And set the intention and create that sort of place within where there is an openness. There is a possibility, regardless of one's condition.
Totally.
There is something here. There's some rich, magical gift.
Yeah. It's beautiful. And to yourself as well. It's not just for others, it's for yourself primarily, so that we can help. We can do whatever we're meant to do, our soul contracts. I really appreciate you guys tuning in. And if you found this helpful, annoying, you have something to say about it, drop a comment. Let's talk. I'm always open to having a conversation and learning something further. Send it to a friend. And, you know, the best way to know that this has been valuable is to like and subscribe. And lastly, I'll put a little pin for my tallow company, Wild Iola. You can see the nice products here. I've got lavender infused tallow, whipped tallow, and my soap is my favorite soap ever. It's truly unscented. The only scent it has is maybe the ingredients, you know, the cocoa butter and whatnot. Really beautiful products. And stay tuned, because I have lavender hydrosol that I have distilled myself from the field of lavender I purchased last summer, to be onto the market soon. And our next guest hopefully will be a water specialist. So we'll get to talk about that and what water filtration looks like. Thank you so much.